Well, hello everyone. I think the further this day continues, the more complicated things seem to be. But my contribution, and I see it within the context of a larger whole, is quite specific. Are we okay now?
Yep.
That one, okay. And I'm presenting the thought about that we may be conserving buildings or pieces of buildings, but we're actually turning them into stuffed buildings. If we look at the HCD for Yonge Street, this is the stretch essentially between College and Law. I think that might be better. I'm quoting from the preface. It says, Yonge Street is one of Canada's great streets. Over the past 225 years of its history, Yonge Street has played a vital role as a key regional route for settlement, commerce, and travel, as a locally important commercial main street for adjacent residential areas, and as a national magnet and hub of artistic and cultural activity. The HCD plans and policy guidelines are, quote, designed to conserve the district's unique cultural heritage, values, and resources. The proposition there, of course, is that Toronto is able to conserve the existing fabric and the culture of what is essentially a block after block of mostly narrow-fronted and affordable Main Street buildings, I guess illustrated on the top right of this slide, in the face of what I would consider overwhelming and mostly unplanned and unanticipated high-rise redevelopment, at hyperdensities that are often exceed those of Manhattan or Hong Kong. In my view, this is a false proposition, given the blunt tools, the attitudes, and recent performance of Toronto's municipal and heritage planning institutions. The so-called planning tools and public policies are woefully inadequate to guide, for the public good, the powerful development interests, the chink of the international scale investments that sees buildings and cities as commodities and attractive parts of an investment portfolio. Without significant change in public policies, my proposition is that the best we can expect is urban taxidermy. So what do I mean by urban taxidermy? The word taxidermy in COD is the art of preparing, stuffing, and mounting skins of animals for lifelike effect. My definition of urban taxidermy is the art of preserving, stuffing, and representing buildings for lifelike effect, attempting to simulate, and the key on the word simulate, an intrinsic social, cultural, and commercial vitality. The consequence of this taxidermist art of conserving building carcasses is the skin-deep Main Street, a kind of stage set or diorama that has little or nothing to do with the vital forces of the community or life on the street and an economically creative and sustainable place. To illustrate, I'm going to focus on one key ingredient. I missed this slide, which is really a key one. That's Yonge Street, partly as planned or conceived by the development industry. Most of the buildings there exist or are not quite completed. Some are planned. We put Yonge Street on the slide there so you can tell where Yonge Street is. A key ingredient of the Yonge Street success as a main street is the repetition and various variations of the building type, what I'm calling the Main Street building block. It's the row after row of independently operated narrow frontage shops. We've heard this, of course, earlier in the day, and shops and businesses that collectively support a very high intensity of social and commercial activity on the street. What sustains the street is the wide variety of shops, cafes, bars, services, and so on at the ground floor, and the offices, showrooms, other businesses, and apartments on the upper floors. All have their entrances on the sidewalk or off from the sidewalk. I'll just take a look at what this building type is. It's narrow fronted and on deep lots. It's a narrow fronted in order to optimize the value of the expensive street frontage, and deep in order to ensure a viable commercial floor plate. The front is on the street, the back is on the service lane. The elaborate street facade expresses pride of ownership and business promotion. And it's the focus of the architectural invention. It's the focus of that, the care and attention which is often applied to these buildings. It's the front, that's the formal front. If we look at the ground floor, it has a recessed street entrance, display windows to the ground level store, lane access to the rear yard, and back of house storage, garbage collection, and parking. The upper floors, there's a second entrance from the street to the stairs to the upper levels, which may be commercial or residential. It has flanking party walls, which are blank in anticipation of the adjoining neighbors. One can repeat that pattern that collectively makes the street wall architecture. And it has entrances every 3 or 4 or 5 meters along the sidewalk. When combined with the like-minded others, this building type enables an intense pedestrian pace, concentration of different choices and opportunities for commercial outlets and businesses and housing per linear meter of sidewalk. All are directly connected with the street, one could say in conversation with the street. Beyond the display windows at sidewalk level, an excellent measure of the potential synergy between activities of the building interiors and the life of the street is, in a sense, the frequency of these entrances. These are the places that offer passage and mutual energizing effect between the public realm of the street and the public, semi-public, or private worlds inside the buildings. In a way, high frequency of doorways suggests a strong synergy. Infrequent doorways indicate a less synergetic connections. No doorways suggest isolation from the public street and the potential candidacy for urban taxidermy. Add pasted over windows and you've won yourself an award. In the redevelopment scenario that is put forward in the HCD, it requires the protection of the first 10 meters of the heritage buildings in situations where these are contributing buildings, and the additions to the contributing buildings are to be, and we'll show you the section here. The section on the cross-section on the right shows the diagram within the HCD plan that suggests a setback of 10 meters. That, in fact, the section seems to imply that the bit on the top is some kind of addition to the building. What we realize, of course, is that in many examples, and I'll show one in particular, where there's, in fact, that first 10 meters is hovering over a hole that supports 5, maybe 6 levels of parking, and on the top, a high-rise building, probably 40 or 50 stories. So this is a rather naive idea about, the other thing that appears on this is this 75-degree angular plane that's supposed to establish the height of the high-rise buildings or the higher buildings. It clearly is not a guideline or a policy that's been followed. I'm going to show you a couple of examples, neither of which were subject to this HCD, but follow similar strategies, conservation strategies. This is one example just at Young Street at Bloor, where we see the 10 meters of this poor, isolated and I wouldn't say forgotten, but it's looking for its family somewhere. But that's not the point I want to make. I want to look first at 5 St. Joseph, which is considered to be, I think, a very good example of conservation, Main Street conservation. And indeed, I should explain that the tower, maybe I should go back one, I think that takes me back. You can see the Young Street frontage in the left-hand side of that. The tower entrance and so on is on the side street, St. Joseph in this case. And the tower well back from the street, from Young Street. So that it appears that the entire buildings along Young Street have, oh my goodness, have been conserved. In fact, the parts of the building that relate to Young Street is this part of the building. Quite a handsome facade onto the street. But when we look at what is going on there, we see 7 frontages, what used to be 7 frontages, two buildings, two tenants, if you like, a bank and a coffee bar, and lots of what I call ghost entrances and 2 real entrances. If we just slip down the street southwards and you see the building I've just been referring to on the right-hand side of this slide, here's a number of frontages. It's got 10 entrances, 7 shops, and 12 businesses. I mean, I'm guessing here, I'm looking at curtains and blinds and things to kind of estimate what we've got there. But we've got a lot of stuff that's directly related to the street. The ghost entrances are these. And you see Bob desperately trying to beat the door down. And this is the interior of the coffee bar. The street, Young Street is on the left-hand side. So this is the depth of the coffee bar. You see it's so narrow that the tenant has to have at least 3 frontages to make a coffee bar work in that kind of space. I'll go to another example, and this is my final example. So if I'm running out of time, I'll steal a bit. This is Young Street, just north of Bloor, between Yorkville and Cumberland. There, in fact, is 2 buildings on this block now, one to Cumberland. What's interesting, of course, neither of these promotional images shows the other one next door to it. This is the block in 1910. You can see it's fully developed. The buildings, the brick buildings, the pink ones on the street, extend roughly halfway into the block. In 2014, it looked like this, where the backs of the blocks were being filled up, some to as much as, I mean, complete coverage of the blocks, of the sites. And one looks like it might have had a really interesting patio or garden with all those trees. This, again, is about 2014. This is taken from Google. One of our favorite stores on the corner that's went about 5 years ago. And a really lovely facade along the street, starting at Cumberland and going through to Yorkville. Handsome buildings making a complete block. That's the one Yorkville promotional drawing showing the restored facades in the tower behind. When we look at the plan, this is the plan of both of these projects. I've compiled these drawings. The yellow, the ochre area is the area of the existing buildings that has been retained. The missing middle there, I think the intention, it's a hole now, I think the intention is to rebuild the heritage building on that site. And this shows, overlaid on that, the area of retail at ground level. Particularly obvious, I think, on the 8 Cumberland, that's the one to the left of this screen, of this shot, is the very narrow depth, again, probably about 30 meters, 30 feet, 10 meters back from the street. And we may hear from Alex later on about what's a reasonable depth for retail. But it looks like wrapping it around Cumberland Street and from Young is really going to be not very viable retail. This is the cross-section of 8 Cumberland. And you can see the retail related to Young Street, as I say, probably about 10 meters. The commercial space above, which is very uncertain on the drawings that I had access to. But what is very certain on the 3rd level is their garbage and cycle parking. That's what now faces Young Street, or will face Young Street. So my conclusion is that this may well show well from the tour bus perspective. It may show well in the diorama that eventually I think will appear at the ROM. That we will be remembering things through these stuffed buildings, but they have no real purpose or function, social function, economic function within our city. Thank you. Oh, the last one. This is my favorite. This is the Hockey Hall of Fame with very complicated, a beautifully restored building, both inside and out. But this is when you get, it's all about entry, that building. It's on the corner. You know, you go those grand flight of stairs to these lovely restored doors, and there's very complicated instructions about how you enter this place. Thank you.